Hello everyone, my name is Hamadrin. I'm a Welsh Pakistani writer and novelist based in Wales, and today I would like to talk about Faiz. Faiz Ahmad Faiz is undoubtedly one of the greatest poets of the Urdu language, whose works are celebrated in the Indian subcontinent and beyond, and continue to inspire generations after generations of poetry lovers. In 2020, I interviewed Salima Hashmi, a renowned Pakistani artist and Faz's daughter, for Just Another Poet, Wales's first YouTube channel dedicated to poetry, created and curated by fellow writer Taz Rahman. And we are very happy to share that interview with you today. But before that, I would like to read a poem by Faiz in Urdu, followed by its translation in English. बोल बोल के लब आज़ाद हैं तेरे, बोल ज़बां अब तक तेरी है, तेरा सुतवां जिस्म है तेरा, बोल के जां अब तक तेरी है. देख के आहन गर की दुकान में तुंद हैं शोले, सुर्ख है आहन, खुलने लगे कुफलों के दहाने, फैला हर एक जंजीर का दामन. बोल ये थोड़ा वक्त बहुत है, जिस्मो ज़बां की मौत से पहले, बोल के सच जिंदा है अब तक, बोल जो कुछ कहना है कह ले.
Speak, for your lips are free. Speak, your tongue is still yours. Your upright body is yours. Speak, your life is still yours. See how in the blacksmith's shop the flames are hot, the iron is red, mouths of locks have begun to open, each chained skirt has spread wide. Speak! This little time is plenty before the death of body and tongue. Speak, for truth is still alive. Speak, say whatever it is to be said.
So yes, thank you very much, Salima, for accepting to be with us today. Really glad to have you here, and on this episode on Faiz of this Just Another Poet, which is the first YouTube poetry channel in Wales. Yes, and yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, we can start. So my first question to you is, you quoted your mother earlier during our email correspondence that you know that you knew the poet more than the poetry. Can you tell us something about Faiz as a man and a father?
Well, that is a very well-known quote, mainly because as an English woman, she was constantly asked this question. And though I think that she was being a little bit modest, because very often, especially in the years when my father was in jail, if he wrote a new poem and she happened to go and visit him, he would often recite and explain each line to her. So in a certain sense, he hoped that the gist of many of these works would be something that she was familiar with, and she was to a certain extent, restricted because of the language, but still. Sorry, it was interrupted. No. But yes, so my mother, being an English woman, did not really understand the niceties of Urdu poetry, but she certainly understood the gist of what the work was about. She knew so much about the background. She knows so much about various kinds of stimuli, if you like, which brought about some of these poems. So certainly, Faiz was a person who shared with his family, first of all. So, I mean, I still remember an occasion when he just come back from Dhaka, you know, on that visit that he went as part of the Bhutto entourage. It was the first time after Bangladesh was formed. Mm. And I remember when he came back from the airport, he came straight to our house. And you could tell that he was deeply, deeply upset. And then, but he had a way of never showing it. He was tremendously calm. And then he said to Shoaib and myself, and I think maybe one or two other people there, he said, "Haan, kuch kaha hai." He used to always say, "Kuch tukbandi ki hai." So, because he never took himself seriously in that sense. And then he read the poem, "Hum ke Thehre Ajnabi." So I think there was an immediacy to how he felt. And also, he was always tremendously keen to share with the family. I think being deprived of being close to those who you love, I think brings a kind of a keenness to your relationship. And he was, I think, more than a father, he was always a friend, because the sort of traditional fatherly role was something that he didn't really play. Like there was no laying down of the law, and there was no insistence that certain things are done and certain things are not done in the way that in a patriarchal setup happens. That was absent in his relationship with us. It was always understood that we would do as we thought best in our own interest. And also he had complete trust in his children. And there were sort of certain interesting occasions where this was tested. For example, when I was, I think about 17 or 18 years old, studying at NCA, National College of Arts, I was offered a role in a play on the stage in Alhambra, where he was at that time the Secretary General. And so he said to me, "Do you want to do this?" I said, "Yes." So he said, "Okay." So he told my mother in passing that, Chini, my pet name, she'll be acting this play. So my mother was aghast. "What? No. You can't." Sort of, that's not the done thing.
Yeah.
So I remember my father looked at her very quizzically and he said, "You expect I'll ask other people's daughters to be on the stage, when I'm not allowing my own daughter to be on the stage." So that was end of conversation,
Right.
I think my mother was always mindful of the fact that she was an English woman, that she would be under scrutiny, social scrutiny. Political scrutiny she didn't care about because she was utterly committed. But social scrutiny vis-a-vis, daughters, vis-a-vis social behavior, vis-a-vis cultural norms. So she was conscious of that. And because they had decided very, very early on that we would be brought up in the culture where Faiz came from, therefore it was assumed that we would observe cultural norms per se.
Yeah.
So as a father, he was very open as to how we interpreted those norms.
Yeah.
And I remember once I was, he'd come back from jail, and when he left, I was 8.5, and he came back, I was 13.
Wow.
So I considered myself an adult, And I remember once, and I used to dip into his library and I used to take whatever books I felt. And I remember once I was sitting reading Emile Zola and Germinal. So my mother and he was around. He said to my mother, "Should she be reading this at this age?" So my mother said, "Well, the books are there in the library." So he said, "Yes, I suppose so." So it was a very, it was a friendship. It was as equals, but there was always this deep concern for our well-being and our welfare, which was never overt. It was never verbally expressed, but it was almost by a kind of an osmosis that you knew that it was there. I think he was especially worried about us during the Zia-ul-Haq years, especially when he went into exile and when my husband was arrested. And so, he was deeply concerned, but he also knew that we would walk the walk, and we would do what was expected of us.
And you.
Yeah. So he was a truly emancipated man. And that was the basis on which our family life was conducted. So, so the poet and the man were really not very far apart.
No.
I say this because I always thought, I grew up thinking that all great poets were great. I was shocked when I discovered it was not so. So, that was something. He was very, very unusual. That the man was no different from the poet.
Poetry. Yeah, great. Thank you very much for sharing that. So my next question is, how do you think which is very linked to the earlier question, how do you think having a personal relationship yourself with Faiz has affected your has affected your reading of his poetry, and do you think it gives you a different perspective on his poetry?
Well, I should confess at the outset, I'm not an Urdu scholar. So though I, went through college, and the first 2 years I took Urdu as an elective, and so I studied Iqbal and Hali and, that kind of thing. But certainly no in-depth knowledge of Urdu literature. Having said that, I think that my closeness to him certainly gave me an insight and a very, very deep understanding of so many things. Circumstances that led to a poem, and I remember because, as a small child, he didn't have time for poetry because he was setting up the Pakistan Times and Imroz, Partition. There was always a lot of coming and going and turmoil and hard work. But sometimes I knew that something was happening because he would hum, and my mother used to tease him and used to say, oh, it's coming, is it? And so I was, curious child. I would say, what? So my mother used to say, oh, he's going to the cinema, as a joke. So when he was humming, I would say to him, aap cinema dekhne ja rahe? So he would smile. And then he'd go for a walk in Lawrence Gardens. That was not very far from our house.
Right.
And then, he'd come back and my mother would say, well, and he'd say, it's coming, that sort of thing. But of course, there were much more significant moments, like, for example, when we visited him when he was in jail, and he would tell my mother, this is a poem that I've just written. I remember once he wrote a poem for her birthday, which was called Salam Likhta Hai Shayar Tumhare Husn Ke Naam. And he read it out to her line by line. And then he gave it to her and said, you give it to so-and-so magazine and buy something for yourself. So she said, no, the children need new shoes. So he said, no, not new shoes for the children. This is for you. You have to buy some. And then, I even remember a particular poem, which I've forgotten exactly, when he described to her, us dar se bahega, something ka seemab, and band kaba. And so these things, as he was explaining to her, and as a child of 9 years, would sit there and listen to this. Much, much later was that famous occasion, which I've often talked about, when he went to jail the second time with General Ayub Khan, and he was put in the fort. And then they shifted him to the jail. He had to go to the dentist. He was having pain. So they didn't have transport, and they put him into a tonga. I just happened to be coming out of Lahore College, where I was studying, Law College for Women. And I see my father, who's supposed to be in Lahore Fort, in that tonga, in the front of it. And, there's police around him. He didn't have handcuffs. And he's smoking and looking into the distance. And I was stunned standing by the road, and I waved at him. And he didn't see me. He was, in his usual way, smoking and looking far away. And I sort of shouted, didn't hear. So I came home and I told my mother, I saw Abba today. So she said, I'm dreaming. I said, no, he was in a tonga. So she said, nonsense, what are you talking about? And she started muttering to herself, like her father dreams all the time. It so happened that she had a mulaqat with him the following Thursday, and which was in Lahore jail, district jail, which was very near my college. And she said to him that, were you out on the roads? So he said, yes, I went to the dentist. So she said, your daughter was standing by the roadside waving to you, didn't she? And a lot of other people also apparently recognized him on that trip. And they waved, and, there were sort of people around wondering, what is happening? Yeah. And he was quite oblivious, totally oblivious. So that is how, later he explained the poem, which is, the famous "Rakhte din baandh lo, dil fagaro chalo." Hum qatl ho aaye, yaro chalo. So there were moments like that, when there were certain things that happened in a particular way. But I also was witness to this when he came back from this Ayub Khan period, which was a much shorter period in jail, 5.5 months. He had been quite prolific during those couple of months. And as soon as he came out, the first thing he wanted to do was to recite. So, there would be a group of friends, Hamid Akhtar, Abdullah Malik, and then he would, recite a poem and describe, this is what this is about. And I think that all of that certainly helps you, not really to interpret, but I think it gives you a kind of an overlay on some of the poems, which now when I read them, I sort of resurrect so much doing that. And then those years in Beirut, especially, the poems written then, his closeness to the revolution, the Palestinian revolution, all of that, I think is something, because I visited him in Beirut. So I saw his very intense experiences of exile. And because of his friendships with so many other writers who were in exile and who also happened to be in Beirut, Moin Basisu and Mahmoud Darwish and people like that. Yeah. So it was, I saw that there was camaraderie, but there was intense longing for home. And, it was so palpable, almost physical. So that, of course, helps you when you're reading.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Great, thank you very much. And you're also a renowned artist. And my next question is, do you think Faiz helped or inspired you and your career as an artist? And if so, in what sort of ways?
I think, yes, I'm an artist. I don't consider myself a very renowned artist. Yes, I'm a teacher. I think I'm far more renowned as a teacher than I am as an artist. And that was very deliberate, because I think that I had the good luck to be in an institution which was in a very formative stage when I joined as a young teacher. And I had the advantage of having myself had great teachers. Among them, during my years in England, I studied people like Howard Hodgkin, Adrian Heath, and Robert Denny, and so on. So I was passionately committed to the younger generation of artists in Pakistan. And all of that, and my own work also, was of course influenced by my upbringing, about my closeness to a milieu of which Faiz was a prominent figure. I think my work has always been committed to the political environment that I have been part of, the social, economic, political context which framed my life, also framed my work. And then during Zia's period, the women's movement, human rights movement, all of these stem from a certain kind of a consciousness, which of course has to do my father and my mother, both of them. Because, very often people forget that, Alice became a member of the Communist Party in Britain when she was 16 years old, Faiz was still dreaming of, Mehbooba somewhere in government college at the time. And I think that was a passionate political commitment actually stood her in good stead in the years which were very, very hard. I mean, she came to India in 1938 and she was not able to return home to England until 1958. Wow. So 20 years. During which, of course, my father went to jail, my uncle died, many things. But she had such a firm and solid, passionate social and political commitment that I think that affected Faiz a great deal. And certainly it had its influence on the way that I look at my own work, the fact that I'm deeply committed to the women artists movement, part of writing a manifesto for women artists of Pakistan in the Zia years, which you couldn't make public at that time, but now is printed and published. And very often I take the titles of my work from his poetry, because whatever the stimulus is, whatever the reason is for doing a particular series of works, somehow when it comes to putting it into words, because you need words sometimes to put a title, somehow they seem to come from Faiz. So even my curatorship, when I'm curating an exhibition, sometimes I will borrow a phrase from him, because I think he spoke beyond his time and beyond his generation, and so many artists use his poetry in their titles, in the way that they talk about their work. So yes, his work is very relevant to how I've done my own art, how I've done my own teaching, and to other kinds of activism that I've been involved in.
Great, thank you very much. And you mentioned that many other artists and writers have borrowed phrases or titles of his poems and other works. I remember in his own lifetime, I think Quratlan had written Aakhir Shab Ki Hamsafar, which is from a ghazal by him. Great, thank you very much. And as a woman, how do you see Faiz's poetry? Can you offer us a feminist perspective on that?
I think it's interesting that there is an aspect of my father's poetry. I mean, I'm not going to make a scholarly review over here, which is deeply feminine. And I think that comes very much from the Sufi tradition. It comes from the feminine voice in Sufi poetry, whether it's Punjabi or, Urdu. And in that sense, Faiz is a Sufi poet. And it's the vulnerability of the human being, which in a sense is very representative of the vulnerability of the female, more so in our society. But it is full of, I would say, resolve. And because it's full of resolve, I think it is something that can be claimed by feminists, because it refuses to cow down. It refuses to be browbeaten. It believes in standing up and being heard. And therefore, it's not difficult to say that, Faiz is our friend. and Faiz can represent us. It's like Jalib also. Jalib, of course, is a far more people's poet, well understood and easily understood poet. But I think that Faiz certainly has a woman's voice, in his poetry. And therefore, I think that he's been sung so much for that reason, I think, and sung so well by women, and continues to be sung by women. I mean, I was looking at the women in Shaheen Bagh, and how they took Hum Dekhenge to heart and how they sang their hearts out. You can do that if you feel that this is my voice. So I think that, and of course, his stand always was very pro-women. I mean, he was not patriarchal by any means whatsoever. Strongly believed in women's rights, in their rights to their lives, their bodies, what they wanted to do with them, and how they wanted to, carry out what was their place in life and what were their aspirations. So tremendously encouraging also. So naturally, I would think he is a friend to feminists.
I think there's been feminist readings into his poetry interpretations and that sort of thing all over the world. Great, thank you very much. And you just mentioned Hum Dekhenge, which until very recently, just last year, it became the anthem of the protests that occurred in India in the context of there was some amendment in the constitution, Indian constitution, and so his voice and words have been a beacon of hope and light for many movements, certainly. So how do you feel about Faiz being and staying this symbol of both revolution and peace throughout this time?
I think he was very, very vocal in his belief and his commitment to peace. And that is as long as I can remember. After all, he refused ever to go into nationalist jingoism, when there was armed conflict between Pakistan and India. Unlike many of his friends, both this side and that side, who felt constrained to wave the flag, he didn't. And it was not because he didn't love the soil that he was standing on. It was because he believed that shedding of blood for suspect aspirations was something that he could not put his signature to. And so, the only poem that he wrote was, Kidre Na Pendiyan Dassaं. It's a woman's lament for her lost and dead child. And as he said, there is only one value, and that value is humanism. And for that, you need peace. He did not believe that there could be a world which could go forward without peace. And he believed in constant conversation to attain that. It's not that he didn't believe in struggle. He did. And his, firm commitment to the Palestinian revolution was, one reason. You can say that, okay, because in fact, in those days when you were not sure whether he'd come back alive from the war in Beirut, my husband said to me, Shoaib said to me, this is Faiz's last love, which is a love for the Palestinian revolution. So, don't, because you were so anxious all the time. So he said, he was firmly committed to peace, especially in South Asia. I think he broke his heart over the civil war, with East Pakistan. He was not willing to, sign his name. And he had to run out of Karachi because people were threatening his life. He had to go into hiding. But he was always extremely firm in the fact that he stood for peace, and he considered himself a bridge for that. And he didn't give in to jingoism this way or that way. I remember I was told that, when he was in exile from Pakistan, he did go to India for I think it was his birthday or something, maybe 70th birthday. And there was a big reception for him in Delhi. And this was told to me by a Pakistani diplomat who obviously could not be seen publicly, because Faiz at that time was persona non grata. But he sat in the back row. And he said that, of course, Faiz was given a tremendous reception and so on. And when he finished, people stood up and clapped. And he said when he came to the mic, he said, I will take your applause and your love that you showered on me as a sign of your love for my people. He said, I will take back your message and tell them, how you have expressed your love for them. So this person who's a diplomat, he's sitting in the back row, he said, suddenly I felt I had a right to be there, and I had grown in stature. And in fact, later we heard that the Pakistani ambassador wrote back to the Foreign Office in Islamabad and said that if I had my way, Faiz would be the Pakistani ambassador to India. And that, and this was Ziaul Haq's time, okay, for a Pakistani diplomat to write, and it made waves in the Foreign Office. And I was told this by a friend of mine who was a diplomat, that, this is a very, very courageous memo sent from Delhi to Islamabad. So I think he was always very clear that his job was to promote peace. And he took that very, very seriously. And whenever any opportunity came along, he would take, going as part of Bhutto's entourage to Bangladesh was not for any officials. He simply wanted to make sure that he should make the overtures with the people who were estranged, who had been through this terrible armed conflict. And what he was so saddened by was the fact that people there were afraid to meet him, his old friends, because of the bitterness.
Yeah.
And that was the result of the poetry, though they understood that he had not been partisan in any way. But still, the divide was so great. Of course, now it's recognized by the Bangladeshi government, that he is a friend of Bangladesh. So it takes great courage, actually, to be a peace monger when everybody else is warmongering. But he never compromised on that, ever. And I think that has been understood. So he's a person who is respected in various countries in South Asia for exactly that. Barring the current dispensation, when they're told that Hum Dekhenge is a communal poem.
Oh yes, I heard that as well.
You couldn't get more crazy than that. But forget about these things are transitory. But I think that has been well understood on all sides. In the darkest of times, I think Faiz has been non-controversial when you're talking about peace.
Certainly. That's certainly true. Thank you very much for all these very intimate and for sharing your intimate understanding of the poet and the man. And really honored to have been able to talk with you today and to have you on this platform. Thank you very much.
It was delightful, and I hope that someday I'll be in Wales, because that's one part of England I have not been to. And and so we can meet in person.
Yes, certainly. Yes, that would be a
once
pleasure.
The pandemic has left us.
We are very close to Bath, in fact. I saw some news that you were awarded a doctorate
Yes,
in the
yes.
university. Yeah,
Because I studied in Bath. Yeah, I studied in Bath at the Bath Academy of Art before it became a university. So at that time, we were examined by Bristol University, because this is way back in another century. But I had some very eminent teachers, and it was 3 years, and it was a very, very wonderful part of England to be in. In fact, the college was 8 miles from Bath, in a place called Corsham. And so I went back, had a chance. I had my daughter with me, and I went back and visited after a very, very long time. And it was a wonderful event to be given a doctorate in Bath Cathedral, which is Bath Abbey. Very beautiful. So yes, I love that part of England. And that's when I suddenly discovered that actually I have my mother's genes also.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And
Thank you.
on the behalf of people of Wales, I welcome you to